Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Every month, we extend happy birthday wishes to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee. We count that as anything from a 20th all the way up to a 100th anniversary. This, as ever, is your devoted host, Eric Martin, creator of the Cineverse blog and moderator of the weekly Cineverse film discussion group. Hey, if this is your first rodeo with us, make yourself comfortable. We're glad you're here. So, what's the quintessential 1980s movie? The film released in the middle of that decade at the height of MTV and the Reagan era, when leg warmers, mullets, Rubik's Cubes, synth pop bands, and boomboxes were all the rage. Ask many, and they'll say it's the motion picture that tops Rotten Tomatoes' current list of favorite 80s movies. Back to the Future, the time travel summer blockbuster directed by Robert Zemeckis and executive produced by Steven Spielberg, which was originally released on July 3rd, 1985. This episode, to celebrate 4 decades of futurific fun, I'll be visiting with 2 great guests. First, we've got Back to the Future's co-screenwriter and co-producer Bob Gale. And secondly, Michael Klastorin, author of Back to the Future, The Ultimate Visual History, and the unit publicist for the film's sequels. Together, we're going to examine the movie's lasting impact on pop culture, the clockwork precision of its script, key themes, and much more. But before jumping ahead with those conversations, let's better understand how Back to the Future came to be. Back to the Future is a sci-fi adventure directed by Robert Zemeckis and co-written with Bob Gale. Starring Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, and Thomas F. Wilson, the film centers on Marty McFly, played by Fox, a teenager who is accidentally transported from 1985 to 1955 in a modified DeLorean time machine created by his quirky inventor friend, Doc Brown, portrayed by Lloyd. Zemeckis and Gale developed the concept in 1980 during a rough patch in their careers, but struggled to gain studio interest. Many rejected the script for lacking the edginess popular in comedies at the time. Universal Pictures eventually greenlit the film after Zemeckis had a breakout hit with Romancing the Stone in 1984. Now, Fox was always the top pick to play Marty McFly, thanks to his comedic timing on the sitcom Family Ties, but scheduling conflicts initially kept him from getting the part. Several other young actors were considered for the role, including John Cusack, Johnny Depp, and C. Thomas Howell, but Universal executive Sidney Sheinberg pushed for actor Eric Stoltz, who had recently impressed in the film Mask. Filming began in late 1984 with Stoltz, but Zemeckis quickly realized Stoltz's serious tone clashed with the film's lighter screwball style. After weeks of filming and growing concern over Stoltz's fit, Zemeckis, with Spielberg's support, secured Fox for the role. Fox, now available due to changes in his Family Ties schedule, agreed immediately without reading the script, and filming restarted with him at an extra cost of approximately $4 million and a month's delay in filming. The movie was shot throughout Southern California, including Universal Studios' backlot for the Hill Valley Town Square, Whittier High School for the school scenes, and Pasadena and Arleta neighborhoods for the characters' homes. Production finally wrapped on April 26, 1985, after 107 days, and the film was eventually released in the summer, becoming a massive hit, grossing over $380 million globally to top the box office for 1985. Critics praised its clever storytelling, humor, and standout performances, especially from Fox and Lloyd. Back to the Future was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including Best Original Screenplay, Best Original Song, and Best Sound, winning an Oscar for the latter. Today, Rotten Tomatoes awards the film a 93% fresh rating, with an average critical score of 8.8 out of 10. The film also garners a Metacritic score of 87 out of 100. All right, climb in the DeLorean with me and travel now back to 1985 to listen to the original theatrical trailer for Back to the Future.
Steven Spielberg presents Back to the Future, a Robert Zemeckis film. Marty leads an ordinary life.
No McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley. Well, history is going to change.
And 1985 is not his year. But Dr. Brown is about to change all that.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
He's sending Marty 30 years back in time.
It works! It's a flying saucer from outer space!
Now, he's trapped in the past,
It's got to be a dream.
about to meet
Chocolate.
his future father.
He's a peeping Tom.
Wow!
And he's making an impression on his mother.
He's an absolute dream. And he can sleep in my room.
Anything you do could have serious repercussions on future events.
Now, he's got to make his mother and father fall in love.
For crying out loud, I haven't even been born yet.
And only Dr. Brown can help him get back to the future.
Are you telling me that this sucker is nuclear?
Precisely.
Michael J. Fox,
Whoa, this is heavy.
Christopher Lloyd,
There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
Back to the Future.
You know what would really blow Doc Brown's mind? Being alive in 2025 and never having seen Back to the Future. That's what. So if you have yet to take this movie out for a spin, well, now's your chance before the conversations ahead become spoilerific. And you'd better hurry because Doc's getting impatient.
Damn!
Let's say hello to the Academy Award-nominated screenwriter and film producer Bob Gale, best known for co-scripting and co-producing the Back to the Future trilogy, and for sharing screenwriting credits on Used Cars, I Want to Hold Your Hand, 1941, many movies. Bob, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Cineversary podcast.
Hi, Eric. I'm happy to be here and happy to share my stories with you and your listeners.
Can't wait to get into them. Absolutely. So let's dig right in, shall we? Your creative partnership with Robert Zemeckis. Now, this goes way back. Can you share how the two of you first connected and maybe what made your collaboration as screenwriters click so effectively?
We were both students at USC Film School. We met in our junior year, which would have been fall of 1971. At that time, USC cinema department was the bastard child of the university. There were 47 people in our class. 80% of them were graduate students. 20% were undergrads. And we were both undergrads. So the undergrads kind of hung out together because we did not have the pseudo veneer of sophistication that the grad students all thought that they had.
Okay.
Bob and I shared similar upbringing. He was from Chicago. I was from St. Louis. So we had a Midwestern upbringing. And he was the first person in my life I met who ever had the original soundtrack album of The Great Escape.
Wow. So street cred right there, right?
Exactly. So we liked the same kind of movies. We had the same kind of ambitions to make Hollywood movies. I wanted to be a writer. He wanted to be a director. And we just hit it off right away and thought we ought to start working together. And we collaborated a little bit in film school, but we actually decided that we wanted to get out of school and start making movies, start making feature films. None of this apprenticeship stuff.
Right.
We wrote, before we graduated, we collaborated on a screenplay called Bordello of Blood. Took 17 years for it to get made as Tales from the Crypt presents Bordello of Blood.
That's right. Refresh me. Wasn't that Dennis Miller?
Dennis Miller. I don't recommend the movie. Joel Silver was the producer of Tales from the Crypt. He kind of took it away from us and gave it to the producers of the TV show to throw them a bone so that they didn't leave the show. So these guys completely rewrote it. It's the one movie I have a credit on that I don't really recommend anybody go see it.
Well, it is nice, though, that your first work with Bob actually came to fruition in some way.
Never throw anything away.
Exactly. You know? Right. And Hollywood, I mean, they're desperate to recycle almost anything, especially nowadays.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So maybe we ought to recycle that.
There you go. Well, speaking of recycling, my goodness, I hope they never consider reinventing Back to the Future, the trilogy, redoing it, because that would be blasphemous to me.
Well, it'll be blasphemous to us too.
Yep.
And as long as we have something to say about it, that's never gonna happen.
Keep speaking up. I agree with you. So speaking of Bob Zemeckis, are you still in touch?
Oh, God, yes. Bob and I are in regular contact. I just emailed him twice yesterday, had lunch with him about 2 weeks ago. And yeah,
Fantastic.
he's about to start a new picture. He's over in Italy taking a break. But yeah, hey, we're good friends. We've always been good friends. And knock on wood, that'll remain to be the case till they write our obituaries. We've spoken about this many times. The first line of our respective obituaries will contain the words, "Back to the Future."
Yeah, and if they screw that up, you could always invent a time machine and go back and make sure they fix it. But it's good to hear that you're still connected with Bob and that he's still obviously active in filmmaking. I know this is the question you probably asked the most, but wasn't it a look through your father's high school yearbook that sparked your idea for Back to the Future?
Exactly. I was visiting my parents from suburb of St. Louis. I was actually there in August of 1980 on a promotional tour for used cars, which was opening in St. Louis. So I was doing all the local boy does good stories. And my father salvaged a bunch of stuff from a basement flood. And he said, go through this box and see if there's anything you want to keep. And his high school yearbook from 1940 was in there.
The year that you were thumbing through the yearbook was what? What year for you?
1980. And I graduated the same high school in 1969, 29 years later. So I'd never seen his yearbook before. And I thought, hey, this would be cool. Let's see what my high school looked like in 1940. And much to my surprise, my father was the president of his graduating class. And I looked at this picture of my dad looking very straight and proper. And I thought about the president of my graduating class, who was a guy I would have had nothing to do with. And I wondered if I had attended high school with my dad, would I have been friends with him? And that was when the proverbial bolt of lightning struck.
Yeah, good kernel of an idea for a screenplay.
Exactly.
So what else inspired the story? So you had that impetus, and then how did it get snowballing?
The next thing was when I came back to California, Bob and I had always been kicking around a time travel idea, and we'd never gotten very far with it because we hadn't found a hook. I said, Bob, I got the hook for our time travel story. And I told him this, and he said, oh my God, that's great. What if your mother went to the same high school and all the things she said she never did, she did? And it just snowballed from there. We just started kicking ideas around. Mom falls in love with the son instead of dad. And then we had to ask the question, where did the time machine come from? How do we affect time travel?
Right.
And it was always going to be a time machine because, we grew up in the 50s and 60s. We were Sputnik kids. Math and science. For it to be believable, it had to be a machine.
Yeah, it couldn't be like a Clarence Angel kind of device where, he grants your wish. That's been done, right?
Exactly. That's been done. And Connecticut Yankee got flonked on the head. He went back in time that way. And Christmas Carol, Scrooge gets visited by the ghosts that take him to the past.
So you had to rule out supernatural elements, it sounds like.
We just weren't going to buy that. Because if it was supernatural, you'd say, okay, do we believe this or not? But we thought if it was a machine, yeah, people would believe it. So that was why we needed a character like Dr. Emmett Brown, who would have invented the time machine.
Crucial character.
Absolutely.
And of course, the time machine itself evolved over many iterations. Originally, I think it was just going to be a static device of some kind. And eventually it ends up as a rigged up DeLorean, which is incredible. So yeah, trace the trajectory of that, like just the evolution of the time machine. I know watching the bonus features on the Blu-ray, that was a long struggle. Even Spielberg, you were kicking around some ideas with him and everybody was stuck, right?
Well, it wasn't so much stuck. In the first two drafts, it was a time chamber built out of an old refrigerator. And the rule was you couldn't travel anywhere before it had been invented. So Doc had invented it in the first draft, which we wrote in 1980 and 81. It took place in 1982. So Marty travels back to 1952. And Doc had already invented the time machine, but he just wasn't able to figure out how to create enough power to run it. It was always a question of power. So Doc had a pet chimpanzee in those early drafts named Shemp, in honor of the fourth stooge. And Shemp accidentally poured Coca-Cola into one of the power conversion devices. And because the formula for Coca-Cola is the most secretly guarded formula in the world,
Yes.
it turned out that was it. That was the magic ingredient that made it work.
It's amazing to think what could have been. Instead of a Pepsi product promotion, it could have been Coca-Cola.
It could have been. So we ran with this idea, and the idea that it was nuclear powered was something that we took very literally.
Mm-hmm.
And the climax of the movie, even in the early draft with the DeLorean, took place at a nuclear test site. Bob and I had been inspired by a movie called The Atomic Kid. I think that was a 1952 movie starring Mickey Rooney.
Hmm.
It's one of the most perverse movies ever made. We both saw when we were kids. And Mickey Rooney and his buddy are prospecting in the desert trying to find some uranium. And they happen upon one of these fake towns that the Defense Department was always building could test nuclear bombs.
Right.
And they think it's a real town. And so Mickey Rooney gets caught in a nuclear blast and he gets irradiated. And rather than getting killed, he ends up with superpowers. And, everything that he touches becomes irradiated, and it's good. It's just so twisted.
Huh.
But we got the idea about having one of these towns in the desert. And of course, we saw Atomic Cafe, which was a documentary about nuclear tests. And they talked about that. And so we thought, wouldn't it be cool to recreate that? So we actually had this climax where they had to bring the time machine literally to a nuclear test site. There would be a dish on it, and it would harness the actual nuclear blast.
Mm.
The reason that it changed from a chamber refrigerator into a car is that when we were finally in pre-production, Bob is now wearing his director's hat, and he's thinking, Doc Brown has to put this thing on the back of a pickup truck and carry it around. And I don't want to shoot scenes with him putting this thing on a forklift and loading it on a truck. What could be more boring than that? Wouldn't he have been smart enough to build it into a car? And I said, yeah, that's a great idea.
Logical, yeah.
And at the time, this was summer of 1984, John DeLorean was on trial for the entrapment cocaine case. And so we were seeing this on the news every night. And Bob thought, wouldn't it be great if it was a DeLorean?
Yeah, with the gull-wing door design and futuristic design. Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely perfect. So I didn't think of it, but my God, I know good idea when I hear one.
Yeah, that's a great evolution.
Let's do it. Let's do that.
Makes absolute sense. But it's interesting you relaying that story about how the time machine idea evolved, and originally it being a refrigerator, and then coupled with the nuclear test site, the fake town. It immediately springs to mind Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. There is a scene where Indiana Jones does end up in a nuclear test site town. He shields himself inside of a refrigerator. Did they rip you guys off or what?
Well, I would say that's very likely that Stephen subconsciously remembered all that and thought, okay, let's do this.
Remember our talk about recycled ideas? Hey, there you go. There's another
one. Exactly.
Yeah, that's funny. So how much did the story evolve from your initial concept to what ended up on the screen? I mean, it took a long time, granted. Several permutations of the screenplay, evolutions as we discussed. But, were there other ideas you wish you had made it into the final film, for example?
Well, it's important to understand that in a storytelling sense, Back to the Future is what I would call as a nested plot. So you have the plot that you think it is, which is Marty goes back in time and he has to get home. And then the second plot is Marty inadvertently endangers his own existence.
Yep.
And he's got to repair that. So that's the nested plot, which has to be resolved or the other plot can't resolve.
It's true.
So the nested plot was pretty much the same all the way through. I mean, some details were different, but that idea and the progress of that, and there were things that we immediately thought of when we decided that it was going to be the 50s and the 80s, that Marty would invent rock and roll and that he would invent the skateboard. And those were early ideas that never left the screenplay.
And by the way, that's a genius, idea right there. The fact that It wasn't 1952, I think it was the year you mentioned earlier. It wasn't later. It was smack dab in the middle of the decade many considered the halcyon days, the golden age, the post-war years, but also that pivotal year when rock and roll would have been in its primacy. And timing it at that particular year, that particular moment in history, I think is perfect. And it's also symmetrical from 85 to 55. There's a big round number there. So, yeah, it all worked out synergistically, it sounds like.
It sure did. And, it couldn't have been 86 and 56. That wouldn't have worked.
Right.
And here's an interesting little tidbit for you. Back to the Future, its original U.S. release date was July 3rd, 1985, but it takes place in October 1985. So the movie actually takes place in the future.
In the future, that's true. If you're paying attention to, of course, what's inside the DeLorean and the coordinates that are punched in, you're absolutely right. It's a futuristic movie.
That was obviously a very calculated move on our part, because had the story taken place in 1984, we were worried that people would think, oh, we're seeing an old movie that has been sitting on the shelf for a few months.
Right. And I think that October date, didn't that kind of unofficially become the important anniversary date for Back to the Future fans? Isn't that considered like Back to the Future Day or something?
That's actually October 21st.
21st.
President Obama and British Prime Minister Tony Blair both declared that to be Back to the Future Day.
Right.
And
it's all kind of hazy to me, but I do recall. You're right. Yeah. That speaks to, the pop culture relevance and reach of the movie, though. Like world leaders are talking about the movie, in that context 30 years thereafter. So, Bob, what were the easiest portions of this narrative to write, if you can recall, and what were the most difficult?
Well, I'll tell you the most difficult one is easy. The dramatic problem that Bob and I had to wrestle with for, I don't know, a couple weeks probably, was how are we going to end the relationship between 17-year-old Marty and 17-year-old Lorraine?
Yeah, because that could be awkward, yes.
You're my
My name is Lorraine. Lorraine Baines?
Yeah. But you're so thin.
Just relax, Calvin. You've got a big bruise on your head.
Where are my pants?
Over there? On my hope chest? I've never seen purple underwear before, Calvin.
Calvin, why do you keep calling me Calvin?
Well, that is your name, isn't it? Calvin Klein?
Yeah. When you watch it in the movie, it seems natural and effortless and all that. But we didn't want Marty to do anything bad to his future mother.
Right.
He couldn't hit her or couldn't curse her out or make himself really dislikable because the audience wouldn't like that.
No.
So we realized has to be the one to break this off. And what we had going for us, we realized, is that's what the audience wants to see. The audience doesn't want them to be together.
Yeah, they don't want that ick factor. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So we invented this idea that, she says, when I kiss you, it feels like I'm kissing my brother.
Yes, which works
and
well.
she's repulsed by that. And so, who's to say that's not what would happen if a future mother kissed her future son?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah, no, but I have to ask you a question there. And I've been wondering this. In that scene where the young Lorraine kisses Marty, she stops mid-kiss. She's, as you said, repulsed. And she says it was like kissing her brother. Was this a wink-wink at the audience that riffed on the earlier Star Wars trilogy? And if you recall, you have Leia kissing Luke in the first New Hope and in Empire Strikes Back. But then in Return of the Jedi, it's later revealed that they are siblings. I'm just curious if there was a little bit of a nod to Star Wars there.
Eric, you're the first person to bring this up. Oh, no. This is why I love doing these podcasts and interviews, because every once in a while, somebody comes up with something that never even occurred to me.
All right, there you go. I've already earned some brownie points because one question on the list you haven't been asked before. Fantastic.
Right. And now you watch Game of Thrones and, it's all about incest.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing all this taboo stuff. It's just, out of control.
Obviously, the relationship between young Lorraine and Marty is among the more difficult portions of the script. How about easier aspects, stuff that came easier that you thought, oh wow, that was less work than we thought it would be?
Well, nothing is less work, really. But for example, the scene where Marty dressed up as Darth Vader,
Mm-hmm.
we had a blast writing that. And if you watch the deleted scenes, you can see the longer version of it. We had a writing teacher at USC who said, "Kill your darlings." And once we put the movie together, we realized, you know what? This is just the same scene over and over
Mm-hmm.
again. The joke is over when Marty says,
Silence, Earthling! My name is Darth Vader. I am an extraterrestrial from the planet Vulcan.
and that's all you need. And there's a whole bunch more. And we just said, we don't need any of this stuff.
Right.
We were just telling the same, making more riffs on contemporary science fiction movies. So as fun as that was to write, it was pretty obvious that we needed to cut it out.
Okay. Yeah, it works perfectly the way it's timed in the theatrical cut.
There were a couple other challenges. First of all was, okay, where are we going to shoot the movie? And originally we went scouting locations thinking that we might shoot this at a real town. And Petaluma, California was a candidate to do it. I think they shot Explorers there.
Did they have like an old-timey clock tower or something?
No, there was no clock tower. Remember, we were still doing the nuclear test site.
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah, it hadn't
the
evolved
clock
yet.
tower wasn't here yet.
Mhm.
But it was it was a classic small town kind of look on one of their main streets. But then when we started realizing what was entailed, we got to switch out all the existing street lights for period lights. We've got to buy out all these businesses. And our production designer, Lawrence Paul, who is especially well known for Blade Runner, he was all over us, especially Bob, to say, Bob, you got to shoot this on the Universal backlot.
Yeah, you need a controlled environment.
Right. I can make this look great. And here's something that maybe you don't know. Certainly some of your listeners don't know. You remember the famous hot dog scene in Dirty Harry? Dirty Harry's eating the hot dog and there's the bank robbery and the car wreck, and he
Sure.
comes out, and it's the first time you hear him do his speech about, did he fire 6 shots or only 5? That was shot on the Universal backlot.
Huh.
And when we found that out, we couldn't believe it because we thought that was a location shoot, and it's not. It's shot on New York Street, and it's one of the best uses of camera work and putting lots of cabs and traffic on the street to make you think that it's real. And, Larry said, we can do this. We can make this look like it's a real place.
Wow. Who'd have thought Dirty Harry helped inspire Back to the Future in some way?
Right. That was a major thing. And then when the budget came in, we were $1 million higher than what Universal wanted to spend. So they said, we're not going to greenlight your picture unless you cut $1 million out. What was the most expensive thing that we had in the script? The nuclear test site scene. So Bob and I gritted our teeth and said, okay, if we cut this scene, we don't have to take the company on location. We don't have to build this town. This will save us $1 million. Now all we got to do is figure out, what do we replace it with? And we realized that to be smart about it, we ought to figure out how to do it on the back lot. And we spent a weekend brainstorming and wandering around on the town square. And somehow we came up with this idea of building a pediment to put on the courthouse. Courthouse Square actually has its own Wikipedia page. To Kill a Mockingbird, that was the courthouse used there. It was a courthouse in Inherit the Wind. You can see it in the pilot episode, The Twilight Zone, Where Is Everybody? I believe it was also used in Gremlins. But nobody ever put a pediment on it with a clock. So we thought, okay, wouldn't this be cool? Let's put a clock on there and have it struck by lightning. And that's where we get that electrical energy to replace nuclear energy. We turned it into electrical energy.
Right.
And that's how we can do that.
Yeah, it checks off several boxes on your screenplay list.
And it's a lesson to everybody to know that sometimes having limits on your creativity makes you more creative.
Exactly.
Because this is way better than the nuclear test site scene.
Totally.
It took us down a really interesting road because we said, okay, how much electrical energy is generated by a bolt of light?
Mm-hmm.
We had no idea. There was no internet back then. So the Writers Guild newsletter always had a back page where it said, if you need information about any of these subjects, here are some people or numbers or institutions that you can call.
Yeah.
So we called up an electrical engineer and we said, we want to harness lightning. How much energy is generated by a bolt of lightning? And he said, it's between 1 and 1.5 gigawatts. Now, we'd never even heard the term gigawatt.
I don't think 99% of the population had.
Right. And we thought it was spelled with a J. So we didn't even bother to ask how much is a gigawatt. It's a billion watts. And actually, the pronunciation is correct because the root of the word comes from the Greek gygos, from which we derive the word gigantic. So the electrical engineers all pronounce it with a soft G, and the computer engineers all started pronouncing it with a hard G.
Huh.
So today we hear, gigabyte instead of gigabyte.
Right.
But if you look it up in the dictionary, you will see that both the soft G and hard G pronunciations are correct.
Wow, you really covered your steps. You got it down to the correct pronunciation and everything. But you came up with 1.21 gigawatts. How come that number?
Just seemed like if it was 1 gigawatt or 1.5, sometimes an exact round number seems convenient,
It sounds like something that would come out of Doc Brown's mouth.
But I need a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity. 1.21 gigawatts! 1.21 gigawatts!
Right, 1.21 gigawatts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yeah. That sounds
plausible.
Okay. Yeah. We'll go with that.
Wow. Fascinating anecdotes. Love hearing this stuff. So were there any previous time travel films or stories that inspired you? I'm sure several can come to mind in my brain, but, or for that matter, were there any predecessors that convinced you to take a different direction?
Well, the time machine, the 1960 George Pell time machine, was key. That was the first time Bob and I really understood the concept of time travel. And I'd read it in a Superman comic or something prior to seeing that, but this was the movie. And of course, we saw the movie before we read the novella. And interestingly, the first hour or so of that movie, before he actually goes into the far, far future, none of that was H.G. Wells. None of that was in the novella. This was all concocted by screenwriter David Duncan and I guess George Pell, who directed it.
Mm-hmm.
And that to us was the most interesting stuff in the movie, where Rod Taylor explains how time travel works. He flashes back to the little time travel experiment he does with the model. He gingerly goes forward, just a few minutes and watches the candle burn down, moves forward a couple of days. Then we have that wonderful sequence where he watches the fashions change in the store window. And then he stops 20 years into the future and thinks he sees his old friend, but it's really his friend's son. All that stuff really spoke to us about, hey, we are traveling in time, but not in space. And that was one of the things that we really loved about that movie, that he traveled in time, but he didn't travel in space. And even when he traveled into the far future and the Morlocks had dragged his time machine into their cave, and when he came back to 1899 or 1900, whenever it was, the time machine was outside of his home instead of in the lab where it was, because the Morlocks had dragged it. And one of the characters points out, look, here's the skid marks in the snow where he dragged it. All that stuff was just really, really well thought out and really cool. And so we were very, very inspired by that.
Anything else besides H.G. Wells' story or the film?
There were episodes of The Twilight Zone. There was one called, I think it was called Back There, where the guy tried to stop Lincoln's assassination, and he failed. That may have been the same one where he tried to kill Hitler, and he failed. And in trying to prevent an incident, he ended up, No Time Like the Past. That's what it was called. Dana Andrews. In trying to prevent a tragedy, he ended up causing it.
Yeah.
That was kind of an interesting take on it.
Cautionary tale.
Then there was one called, of late, I think, of Cliffordsville, where Albert Salmi sells his soul to the devil, who is played wonderfully by Julie Newmar, who played the Catwoman in the Adam West Batman series. And he wants to go back in time and buy up this property that has oil on it. And he spends all of his money to buy this property. And of course, they don't have the technology back then. We all know there's oil there. There's just no way to get it out. So you're stuck with this land, and you're going to have to wait until somebody invents technology.
Yeah, it rings a bell. I've seen a lot of these, but it's been a while. Sure.
Yeah, and Julie Newmar, he says, I got to get home. I got to get back. And Julie Newmar said, well, it's going to cost you something. So you need to get, and she wanted just money. So he ends up selling the land to the guy who's the janitor in his building for, like $50.
Pennies on the dollar.
And
Yeah.
so when he gives back to his president in the 1960s, the guy who's the janitor is now the magnate and owns the building, and Albert Salmi is the janitor. So that was
I got to catch
very
up
cool.
with some of those old Twilight Zones. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had lots of fodder that you could pull from.
Right. And when I was in college, I read Ray Bradbury's The Sound of Thunder.
Oh yeah, it's a classic.
Total classic. Robert Silverberg wrote some really good time travel novels.
Back in the days of old time radio, they had a show called X-1.
Yeah, I got my hands on some of those episodes.
Yeah, or Dimension X, which is the predecessor. Several of these were adapted into like 30-minute episodes, and there's so many time travel ones. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, Robert Heinlein wrote By His Bootstraps, which I think was sort of the impetus for the movie Predestination, which is a very interesting movie. I'm not sure if it makes any sense or not.
Right.
It's a good watch. And then when you're done with it, you say, wait a minute.
Yep. I could see how you were definitely influenced by some of these. But I want to ask you, when scripting this story, you probably get asked this question a lot too, but how far into the weeds did you and Robert go with the theoretical physics, with the quantum mechanics and the speculative science behind hypothetical time travel? And how much praise or criticism did you get from the scientific community?
Well, I remember Michio Kiku, the physicist, he really liked the movie a lot. And he always said that one of the things that we got right was that if you could invent a time machine, and all the physicists will tell you that time travel, the way we envisioned it, it's just totally fictional. And so that's sort of like, okay, that's the rabbit hole you're jumping into. But he said it would necessarily require you to use a whole lot of power. So he thought that element of it was very well thought out. So we never tried to explain it because it doesn't exist. It can't be done. Our MO was, let's come up with certain elements, certain rules of time travel that cannot be violated. So those rules were, we need 1.21 gigawatts of electrical energy, and the vehicle needs to be going 88 miles per hour. And if those things are not happening simultaneously, you're not going to travel through time.
Yep.
And as long as the audience understands the rules and you don't mess with the rules, they're going to be fine with that. You don't change the rules. Now,
stay consistent.
You watch a movie like John Carpenter's The Fog, and sometimes the ghosts come as fog, and they come and materialize as fog from under the door. And then sometimes they actually have to knock on the door.
Yeah, corporeal beings.
And you're kind of saying, what's the rule here? Can they vaporize or not? What's going on here? And in Inception, through the whole picture, they're telling you, you can't go down below level 3. You can never go down to level 4.
Mm.
And then suddenly, 3/4 of the way through, somebody says, hey, you know what? There might be a way you can get down into dream level 4.
So as a screenwriter, these kind of things probably bother you because it sounds like you're a stickler for, hey, set the rules and stick to them.
Exactly. These are absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell me what I need to know. And, if you do something to screw things up, I mean, that's why the audience gasps when the cable disconnects.
Yes.
Oh my God. How is it? If he doesn't connect that cable, this is all going to go to hell. It's, that's why these things work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's important to stick to the rules. No question about it. I want to ask you about your role as co-producer on the film because many people will remember you as one of the screenwriters with Bob Zemeckis, but you're one of the co-producers too. So what did that entail?
Well, one of the things I learned early on, way back when I was in school,
Mm-hmm.
I had this, teenage young man's fantasy that you could be a writer and you could live anywhere in the world. And I could live off the coast of Oregon or live off the coast of Spain and write my scripts and mail them in. And wouldn't that be a great life? And then I found out real quickly, you need to be in Hollywood, and turning your script over to strangers isn't a good idea. Not that Zemeckis was a stranger, but the script isn't the work. The movie is the work. The script is the blueprint. So stick with it to make sure that your movie gets realized in the way that it's supposed to be. I have been extraordinarily fortunate in having made so many movies with Zemeckis, who co-wrote these screenplays with me, or them with Walter Hill, Trespass, who's a writer himself, and he brought a lot to the party when we did that. But he had ultimate respect for writing. I was on the set a lot during that. And I could make a suggestion, and he'd kind of nod. And he was actually the guy who turned to me one day and he said, you ought to be directing. And he was actually the one that helped me get my first directing gig on Tales from the Crypt. So yeah, I got into producing to protect the writing. That's how that worked. So I was around all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I made deals. I was Bob Zemeckis' second brain. Bob knew I was the one guy he could always completely trust, that I would never say anything to him, make any suggestion that was going to put the material in jeopardy.
So in that way, you were especially the ideal co-producer,
Exactly.
as his right-hand man, as you said, second brain, because it's a big deal to be able to trust somebody that implicitly.
Absolutely.
You're wearing a lot of hats in that role, right? So just real quickly, like you said, you have to do a lot of phone calls, deal making, problem solving, right?
Problem solving, and my management style, and Bob's too. We're guys, we don't lose our temper, because you lose your temper and you lose people's respect. We had an assistant director on our first movie, I Want to Hold Your Hand. He said something I'll never forget. He said, there are no problems, there are only considerations. So if you're up against something, don't start cursing God because he made it rain that day. Figure out what you're going to do.
Creativity, as you were talking about earlier.
Right. We don't have that $1 million. Let's figure something else out. We can't do the skateboard chase. In the original version of the skateboard chase, Marty skateboarded in front of an oncoming train. And that's how he got away from Biff. Can't afford it, can't do it. Let's come up with something else. There's always a way to solve a problem. So it was never get mad because of what you can't do. Figure out a way so that you can do it. And, both of us were there to talk each other off the ledge when certain things happen.
Makes sense.
It's good to have somebody you trust. The hardest thing we had to do was in casting, really, because we really didn't want to cast Eric Stoltz. It was between Eric and C. Thomas Howell, and we wanted to cast Tommy. And Sid Sheinberg just did not like Tommy, and he loved Eric. So in a moment of super self-confidence and total self-assuredness, Scheinberg said, I know Eric Stoltz is going to be great. And if he's not great, I'm so sure of it, I'm going to tell you guys right now, you can stop shooting and start all over again with somebody else.
Thank God he said that.
He said it, and when we ended up calling him on it, he was an honest man, a man of his word, and he saw the footage, and he understood where we were coming from, and he may not have 100% agreed with us at that moment, but he had Bob, he had Stephen, he had me, he had Neil Canton, my co-producer, he had Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy, all six of us saying we are going to do better with Michael J. Fox. And by the way, it was Stephen who wisely, very wisely, counseled us. He said, don't go to Sid and tell him you have to recast. You don't want to shut down the movie, because if you shut it down, you may not get it back up
Good
again.
advice.
So get your next actor lined up, and it can't be C. Thomas Howell, because Sid already expressed his dislike of him. And that's when we went back to Gary David Goldberg, producer of Family Ties, who couldn't let Michael out of the show when we first approached him back in August or September. But now it was January, and Michael had done the bulk of the season. Meredith Baxter Birney had been pregnant at the beginning. She now had her baby. So Michael had been carrying the show really while she was pregnant and a lot of times unable to work. And Gary had read the script we'd submitted to him, and he said, I'm not going to let Michael read this because it's so good, he'll hate me for not letting him out of the show to do it. So we went back to him and told him the bind we were in. He said, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to propose. If you guys agree to shoot around our schedule, and Michael agrees to that you guys don't get Michael until we wrap at 6 o'clock in the evening, and you guys can shoot till midnight or 1 a.m., and Michael's willing to live that way, it's okay with me. And Michael said, sleep. I can sleep when I'm dead. Yeah. Of course, I want to do a feature film. Are you crazy?
Yeah, some famous stories about how he had to be carried home in
Yep.
a comatose state,
Exactly.
the lack of sleep. Yeah, but to think what could have been without Michael J. Fox in that role, it just wasn't going to happen.
You and I probably wouldn't be having this conversation.
No, I don't think it would have gained the traction that it did. Yeah, it's definitely his best movie. If you could go back in time, there's a premise for a question, is there anything in the screenplay you would change, or would that create a butterfly effect that would irreparably harm or alter the sequels?
Well, it probably would, but I would say this. When we made the first movie, we had no idea anybody was going to go, much less that there were going to be sequels. We'd been rejected over 40 times.
Yeah.
So people would tell us, time travel movies don't make any money. It's not a genre that's commercial. Your movie's very sweet. It's very nice. And people are going to see movies like Stripes and Porky's. They're not going to want to go see a movie about family.
And then on the other hand, a nice and sweet comment, you have Disney saying, oh, well, there's no way we're going to make something incestuous.
Exactly. So all this stuff is always in the eye of the beholder. But, and as Bob Zemeckis has said many times, if I knew we were going to do a sequel, I would have never had Jennifer get in the car. Because when we came time to do Back to the Future 2, what are we going to do with Jennifer?
Yeah.
And so we had to make her unconscious. But when it came time for us to do the sequel, in the first movie, George is the pivotal character. He's the guy with the character arc. He starts off as a zero and turns into a hero. Marty McFly is still the same guy he was at the beginning as he's at the end, as is Dr. Brown. So we knew that in order for us to have a good drama, we needed somebody to have character growth, and we decided that we need to give Marty a character flaw. Now, we kind of allude to the fact that Marty's a bit of a hothead in Back to the Future. He's quick to, try to confront Biff and forget that Biff is, a head and a half taller than he is. So if we were writing the first movie, knowing what parts 2 and part 3 were going to be, maybe we would have added the line, nobody calls me chicken, somewhere in the first movie.
Yeah. Nesting, as you were saying, right? That would have been a
Right.
good payoff later.
Good setup. So that would be the only thing that I look at and say, wouldn't it have been nice if he actually had said that? But, nobody has any problem believing that he is a hothead because we see him react that way.
Right. No, I think it still works out. Speaking of George McFly, now I'm curious about this. Was he named George in honor of George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life? And is the character in any way inspired by your own father after looking, of course, the germ of the idea, the high school yearbook pictures?
Well, the answer to the second question is no. My father was together enough to get himself elected president of his class.
Yeah, that's quite not the George McFly type.
Right. He was the president of his debate team.
Uh-huh.
My dad was a Class A student, so no, George McFly is not at all in any way, shape, or form
Mm-hmm.
based on my dad. Was the name George inspired by George Bailey? Not overtly, maybe subconsciously,
Mm.
but we never said let's name him George because of George Bailey.
Okay.
Now, we named Marty because we had a production assistant on used cars named Marty, and he was very high energy, and he always ran when he could have walked, and he had the kind of energy that we thought the character should have. So that was why we named Marty Marty.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so some secrets revealed here. Okay, is there a message or theme within Back to the Future that you hope will continue to resonate for another 40 years?
There's the theme of, my parents were once children. That is why I think the movie resonates so well with all generations in all cultures,
Mhm.
because this is a cosmic idea that every child comes to realize by the time they're 7 or 8 years old. And it's overwhelming to think that my mom threw up. My grandma tells me that my dad drank paint. My dad was actually in kindergarten. I mean, those are big ideas, right? And everybody wonders, what did my parents do on their first date?
Yep.
Did dad ask my mom out? Did mom trick my dad into asking her out? Was it a blind date? What would it have been like to be a fly on the wall at my parents' first date?
Mm-hmm.
So Back to the Future touches on all these things that everybody can identify with.
Yeah, so the message of the generation gap, that's evergreen. That's going to continue to fuel this movie.
That's evergreen. And the idea that there are pivotal moments in your life where if you make choice A instead of choice B, it takes you down a completely different road. And we get to see George McFly's life if he doesn't stand up to Biff. And then we get to see his life if he does stand up to Biff. And we can watch a movie like Sliding Doors, which is that same kind of mechanic where in one world, one dimension, she finds out that her husband is having an affair, and another one, she doesn't. And how does her life turn out based on the fact that she arrives home unexpectedly in one and she doesn't in the other? So these are things we think about when we're laying in bed where you're saying, gosh, I wish I didn't cut that guy off in traffic today, or I wish I had been a lot nicer to somebody.
Right.
Or did I make the right decision in choosing to go to this college instead of that college? Or to go out with that person instead of the other person?
Yep, the what if questions.
The what if questions. We all think about these things, and Back to the Future touches on that, and it does it in a really interesting way. And interestingly, the story of the making of Back to the Future is the story of the movie. What if we had made the movie with Eric Stoltz instead of Michael J. Fox?
Yep.
I mean, that's part of the same question.
Alternate universes. Yeah, and again, the evergreen nature of the themes you were talking about, but also just that never-ending question of if you could go back in time, what would you do? Where would you go? How would you try to change things? We've all had fantasies about that kind of thing.
And sometimes things that you think are bad, they turn out to be good.
Right.
And that's always the interesting aspect where we thought we'd made this horrendous mistake in casting Eric Stoltz. And it turned out if we had not cast Eric Stoltz, we wouldn't have gotten Michael J. Fox.
Lessons to be learned. We're called Cineversary for a reason because we celebrate milestone anniversaries of movie classics. So on its 40th birthday, what is Back to the Future's greatest birthday present to viewers, Bob?
Well, I would say that the longevity and the love that people still have for it, and the fact that everybody is still seeing it is great. And that we managed to make a theatrical musical based on Back to the Future.
Right.
And audiences are loving that we're still in the Back to the Future merchandise business. We've got Michael J. Fox coming out with a book. Michael Klastorin's coming out with a new edition of his book. And the screenplay, for the first time, is also being published this year. I just got a draft of it, which I am reviewing. And it's really the screenplay, complete with some of my handwritten notes. You know, a lot of times you see the script is published, but it's not really the script, it's the transcript. And all the lines of dialogue are exactly the way they are in the movie. Well, this is not that. This is the actual shooting script, the fourth draft shooting script, and it's being reproduced with colored pages.
So cool.
So you can see what was revised, and I've annotated it, and I talk about, you know, why do we do this? Why do we change this? Why do we cut this? Why do we add this?
Beautiful.
So I think it's going to be a really nice reference book for people that love Back to the Future and who are also interested in the craft of writing. It's really kind of an inside look at how you actually do it.
Yeah.
And the fact that what you might shoot, you know, some of the great things that are in a movie, they happen serendipitously. You know, you're going to need a bigger boat was an ad lib that Roy Scheider made.
Yeah, right.
Take the gun, leave the cannoli. That was an ad lib. 4 years come out to play with the bottles. That's the actor came up with that. And Michael J. Fox made great contributions.
I'll bet.
The Hoke chest line, Michael J. Fox came up with that. So there are things that happen and you just say, that's great, let's use it.
The screenplay book is coming when?
I think in October. It may be November. I don't know for sure, but it is coming out for the 40th.
So other than that book, anything else on the horizon here? Are there any current or forthcoming projects, events, appearances, or otherwise that you'd like to share with us?
I'll be appearing at the Toronto Movie Con or whatever that is.
What do they call that? Yep.
August 22nd with the rest of the Back to the Future cast.
Oh, fun.
So I'll be there for that. Back to the Future, the musical, the tour version will also be in Toronto at that day during that month. So if you're thinking about going there, get tickets and see the musical if you haven't seen it yet.
Good idea.
I just got back from Florida where we had rehearsals for the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line version of Back to the Future, the musical, which debuts on August 16th. So if you need an excuse to take a cruise, we open the musical in Sydney, Australia on October 2nd. Then in March, we're opening the show in Hamburg, Germany. It's playing right now in Tokyo, sold out till the end of the year. And we're looking at some other venues. And meanwhile, I'm always writing a script, although I haven't had much time to do it in between all this.
I was going to say, where do you find time to do any of this stuff?
I don't. So I'm sort of nibbling at that. But this is a good problem to have.
True.
Have Back to the Future be so popular that I'm still on the Back to the Future train. So many years later, this is a future I never would have predicted.
Incredible. Well, Bob, unfortunately, you've got to make like a tree and get out of here. So my parting bit of advice, watch out for the fuzz when you're flooring it to 88 miles per hour because those speeding tickets, they're a doozy.
I'm not doing that. At my age, that's aggravation that I don't need.
Yeah, I hear you, brother. All right, well, fantastic. This was a wonderful opportunity to talk to you at length and hear all the stories out of school. Great stuff. Thank you again, Bob.
You're welcome, Eric. And as Doc Brown says, your future's whatever you make it. Make it a good one.
Did you know that Cineversary has its own website? That's right, we actually now have a vanity URL that's easy to remember, which will take you to a freshly designed portal where you can quickly access the latest episode of your favorite podcast, as well as all of our previous installments. Now it's a lot easier to spread the good word about our show to your friends and family. You simply tell them to visit Cineversary.com. Pretty simple, right? That's Cineversary.com. We also have a custom email address just for you. Now, if you ever want to share feedback on our show or offer suggestions for future installments, or maybe you just have a question about Cineversary, send it to us at cineversarypodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can really help our show grow by spreading the good word about the Cineversary show to your peeps. Even better, please leave a positive online review and rating, which significantly helps us to get discovered by new listeners. So if you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, some of these other services, simply search for the Cineversary page, look for a link that says something like ratings or reviews, click that link, and leave a review and or rating. While you're at it, take a moment to like us on Facebook. We also have a presence on Twitter. Our handle is @CineversaryPod, where you can easily tweet or follow us. And if you want to go an extra step in your support of our show and help keep us ad-free, please consider making a monetary donation to the Cineversary podcast by visiting tinyurl.com/donate-cineversary. We really appreciate your support. Lastly, have you checked out my Cineverse Group website? Yeah, it's easy to get confused by these similar sounding names, Cineversary, Cineverse, Tomato. But Cineverse is actually the name of my private film discussion group I founded back in 2005 that continues to meet weekly on Zoom. Every week, the Cineverse group watches, researches, and discusses a different movie, and I create a summary write-up, call it a mini essay if you will, on that movie that gets posted to the Cineverse group blog. So if you want to enjoy reading in-depth content that examines different discussion-worthy motion pictures, including classic Hollywood films, independent features, foreign masterworks, modern movies, and silent-era standouts, then visit cineversegroup.com, simply spelled CINEVERSE group.com. Fun fact, every posted article on cineversegroup.com includes a link to a recording of our group discussion of that particular film, with me leading the conversation as moderator. So if you like what I'm doing on the Cineversary podcast, you might also want to give a listen to some of our Cineverse Group recordings, which are podcasts of a different sort. Again, head over to cineversegroup.com, where you can check out some interesting text and audio content on a variety of films, not necessarily celebrating a milestone anniversary. Some hearty applause for our next guest, Michael Klastorin. He's the author of Back to the Future, the ultimate visual history book, and he's also served as a production unit publicist on dozens of films, including the Back to the Future sequels, Office Space, Zombieland, Witness, The People vs. Larry Flint, and many, many more. Hey, Michael, it's a thrill to meet you.
I'm glad to be here.
So tell us how you got involved with the Back to the Future film franchise and what your job entailed as production publicist for the two sequels.
I actually got involved in Back to the Future courtesy of Mr. Christopher Lloyd. I was working with Chris on a film called The Dream Team. And over the course of that time, Chris and I got to be friendly. And as production was winding down, we had the usual conversation that people who are looking for their next job engage in on a set, which is, what are you doing next? Chris told me that he was about to go back and play Doc Brown in Back to the Future 2, and asked me if I would be interested if he recommended me to Robert Zemeckis. I think I said, yes, please. And sometimes a lot of actors make that offer and it never comes to anything. But several months after Chris did, I found myself standing in Hill Valley in 1955 with Doc and Marty and a whole crew of a film behind me. Pretty amazing.
I'll bet. What did you do on that job? What exactly did the duties entail?
As a unit publicist, my job is to deal with everything that deals with the film's release, the film's exposure to the media, or in some cases, to keep secrets away from the media. On Back to the Future, we didn't want to give away a lot of the secrets on 2 and 3. Actually, when I first got hired, it was for part 2. Then, to my delight, I found out it was going to be 2 and 3. So there were times when we would want to invite the press for a little sneak preview, but most of my job in that was to sort of keep a lid on everything.
Even though you weren't associated yet with the first film, you still were able to write the book, Back to the Future, the Ultimate Visual History. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what that involved and maybe some interesting things you learned in researching the first film in particular, which is the one we are celebrating in this episode.
The one thing is, even though I was not officially involved in Back to the Future, I was invited to the set by one of my best friends who was the assistant director, the first assistant director, named David McGiffert. who worked on all three movies. And David called me up when they were filming at Universal Studios and said, "Hey, why don't you come on down?" So, in fact, I did. And I was there on the day that George approached Lorraine in the diner to announce himself as her density,
Okay.
starting the prelude to the skateboard chase. It was an amazing thing. I'd worked on a few films, but nothing of that magnitude. And as I walked around the town square, I just thought, wow, I would love to work on a film like this someday. 4 years later, I was working on it very much like that. So it was amazing. I had a lot of help from everybody in researching and writing the book. First and foremost, from Bob Gale, who absolutely bent over backwards to help me. I remember about 15 minutes after I had called Bob to say that I had had a deal with a publisher, he sent me an email listing a dozen people that he spoke to immediately and had set up interviews for. And because I had done parts 2 and 3, I had relationships with pretty much everybody in the cast and the crews, because most of the crews for part 2 and 3 had worked on the original. So their memories, a lot of documents. Robert Zemeckis opened up his archives to me. He and Bob Gale just kept amazing records, production reports, call sheets, photos, memos, everything that helped make the book as interesting and informative and entertaining as it was.
Well, that's fortunate. Probably made your job a heck of a lot easier, all that careful record keeping, all those documents that they preserved. I assume, even though you weren't technically on staff for the first film, your ability to be there on set for some of those key scenes, you probably remember quite vividly what that was about. And did you do any copious note-taking, or was this just something that you relied on your memory for?
I didn't take any notes while I was on the set of the first film, because I didn't realize I'd be writing a book about it many years later.
Who would have, right?
I do have very vivid memories of that time. I remember in between takes, Michael J. Fox was standing on the corner in front of the diner, and he was practicing Johnny Be Good on his little Chiquita guitar, because they hadn't filmed that scene yet. And Michael was going to get every little bit that he could to make it appear as if he were playing in the film, which he did. George going into the diner asking for a chocolate milk and the glass being slid down the counter, and they didn't all end up in Crispin's hand. But, I think one of the questions that you were leading up to was what it was that made Back to the Future the film that it is over these 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not one thing. It is an amalgam of the writing, the cast, the direction. Everybody's contribution made that film what it is and what it has been.
It's true. And you're absolutely right. It is multiple elements, isn't it, that make this film so evergreen and deserving of celebration 40 years later. To me, I think if you were to pinpoint one particular element that stands out above the rest, however, it's definitely the storycraft, the world building, which are, in my opinion, exemplary. I mean, this is a carefully composed script with cleverly nested layers of setups and layer payoffs that compel us to pay closer attention. It's that story that really sucks you in so compellingly. And it makes it unfailingly entertaining, pure and simple. It's exciting, it's intriguing, it's funny, it's satisfying from that first clock tick on. So is it the story for you that continues to kind of rise to the top as perhaps the greatest strength of this movie 40 years later?
Every successful film starts with a story, and a story that is well crafted and entertaining and informative and touching. Bob and Bob, or the Bobs, as they're known.
Bob squared.
Exactly. Zemeckis and Gale hit every note. And that screenplay is often referred to as the perfect screenplay. And I certainly have no argument with that. It's everything that you said. First and foremost, it's entertaining, it's engrossing. And it took a look at a trope from a different angle. What Zemeckis and Gale did was they sort of turned things on their ear. People who told time travel stories in the past focused on something that was of historical nature, something that, for instance, somebody who tried to go back in time and stop Kennedy's assassination, which was later done by Stephen King.
Great book, yes. Mm-hmm.
But they didn't want to focus on something that had a lot of historical background. This was a personal story. And I'm sure Mr. Gale has recounted the origin of how it came to be.
You're right. It is a different way to tell a time travel tale, is it not? I always say to people, even those who are, not less enamored perhaps of the movie, hey, it may not be Citizen Kane, all right, but it's the Citizen Kane of time travel films, for me anyway, because it sets the standard for subsequent cinematic stories in which characters travel back to the past through technological or supernatural means, and it does it in a very entertaining way. The script is the all-star to me. And yes, is it scientifically accurate? Probably not. It doesn't really matter though, does it? It is the perfect popcorn movie, and that is not a downgrade. That's not an insult by any stretch. There can be some very, very highly entertaining summertime escapist popcorn films. Jaws immediately comes to mind, but it's also an exemplary work of craftsmanship, as this film is, my opinion.
I agree. But it's more than just popcorn entertainment. It has heart, it has intelligence, it has emotion. It's a film that has little things to say in an entertaining way. It's about believing in yourself. Doc's motto, if you believe in yourself, you can accomplish anything.
Right. Actually, that's uttered by several characters in the movie. So, yes, it's repeated.
It is. And it's a very heartfelt way of addressing how people feel about themselves, or maybe how they can feel about themselves.
Yeah, it's a good motto to kind of live your life by. And there's other messages that we can get to down the line here through our interview. I certainly want to approach some of the themes, messages, morals to the story. I'd say that's the big gorilla one, which we'll revisit, no question. But yeah, I mean, the movie also benefits, obviously, from great timing, does it not? Because its release in 1985, it parlays the popularity of the name brand cachet of Michael J. Fox, one of the era's most popular TV characters. Also, Huey Lewis, whose career was at its zenith in this time. Robert DeLorean and his futuristic-looking car were certainly in the zeitgeist. And, of course, Ronald Reagan, who had just won a landslide election victory, the actor president at the time, who was humorously referenced in the movie.
Who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan? The actor? Then who's vice president? Jerry Lewis?
I suppose Jane Wyman is the first lady.
Whoa, wait, Doc!
And Jack Benny is secretary of the Treasury.
Yeah, I mean, good timing does a lot here. In 1985, this is interesting, Michael. It's also the perfect kind of counterpoint to the mid-1950s, right? That post-war period considered by many who lived in that decade to be, a halcyon era of prosperity and simpler living, let's put it that way. Setting the throwback year at 1955, I believe, is perfect because it rounds off the time gap to a nice round number, in this case 30 years. Marty's parents would have been his exact age, and this was also the time when rock and roll was in its infancy, which becomes a key plot point, right? So ironically, when we're talking about this gap, 30 years. Now it's much longer than that span in the story because it's been 40 years. So there's a bit of irony there, isn't it?
It is, Eric. But the thing that you have to remember is that you couldn't make Back to the Future today.
Yeah, tell me why.
Because of the vast difference in the two time periods that are examined. 1985 is so very different from 1955, whereas 2025 and 1995 aren't that far apart.
Did you mean 2025 and 1985 weren't that far apart?
No. I'm saying 30 years.
Oh, right. The same 30-year gap. I see what you mean.
So in these 30 years that we're talking about now, between 95 and 2025, there are differences, but they don't have the significance that the differences of Back to the Future's periods have.
That's really interesting. I've never thought about it that way. I guess I've never thought that deeply about the movie beyond the pure entertainment value. Although, of course, for this episode, I've done my homework. I've done a little more thinking about it in general. But yeah, that's interesting to kind of compare the 30-year gaps there, how much America and culture has changed in Yeah, you make a pretty good argument there. More of a dramatic sea change between, 55 and 85. Yeah, I can maybe buy that argument.
I read a lot of comments from the fans and Facebook pages,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people have a lot of questions, or they pose a lot of questions. And some of them are interesting, some of them are kind of silly. We love the fans. If it wasn't for the fans, we would be here talking about Back to the Future today. The development of our technology has given the fans even more, good or bad, to discover and talk about. And when I say bad, it's because when these films were being made, nobody knew that one day you could watch the movie and stop and look at every single frame of it on a 16-inch screen.
Yeah.
And analyze things.
Right.
One of my favorite questions is when Doc and Marty are in that parking lot and Doc is controlling the DeLorean with a remote control.
Mm-hmm.
People said, well, wait a minute. The DeLorean is a stick shift. How can Doc control it by remote control? And my answer to that is, if you believe this man created a device that could travel through time, don't you think he might be handy in other ways?
Right. It's kind of like hey, if we could put a man on the moon, why can't we do this, right?
Exactly.
But boy, you really gave me something to think about there, just in terms of how could they remake this movie, or if it had never been made, could it be made for the first time today? And I think you're onto something. That gap would have to be a lot bigger than 30 years, I think, is the main takeaway there, because, yeah, that was quite a jump in technology, innovation, culture, just the way people think between 55 and 85. Yeah, food for thought there. But, also in terms of answering this question, what makes it a great film 40 years onward, what gives it its staying power and all of that, this is no denigration to Robert Zemeckis, who I think is a fine director in his own right and has a filmography to prove it. But I think Back to the Future is widely considered by many perhaps the best movie made by one of Steven Spielberg's closest collaborators or imitators, and not made by Spielberg himself. And in my opinion, I think this is Zemeckis' greatest film. And there are several to choose from, right? I mean, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, of course, the sequels, the Academy Award-winning Forrest Gump, Contact, one of the great science fiction movies that nobody really talks about anymore, and Castaway, for that matter. So, yeah, this is indisputably the picture that elevates Zemeckis to the directorial A-list, and rightly so. Here I'm going to quote Roger Ebert, who said that Zemeckis shows not only a fine comic touch, but also some of the lighthearted humanism of a Frank Capra. The movie, in fact, resembles Capra's It's a Wonderful Life more than any other conventional time travel movies. It's about a character who begins with one view of his life in reality and is allowed, through magical intervention, to discover another. And, the praises aren't restricted to Ebert alone. Here I'm going to briefly quote Emily St. James of Vox, who wrote that Zemeckis shoots even normally prosaic sequences, like a school dance, as if they were car chases. When it comes time for the bells of Back to the Future's ticking clocks to start ringing, his editing leaps to a breathless level of intensity. He displays an admirable level of expertise in turning the movie into a kind of living pinball machine, steadily ramping up the pace of his action sequences to train you for the all-out assault of the final half hour. So yeah, I mean, a tip of the hat here to the director and his collaborators, and of course, Bob Gale as well.
Well, of course, I don't think that Mr. Zemeckis would feel slighted by any of that.
Mm-hmm.
He is a brilliant artist and an amazing director, but he acknowledges that he will always be first and foremost known as the director of Back to the Future and its trilogies. And I don't think he has any problem with that.
Nor should he, in my opinion. I mean, it's a work of excellence, the whole trilogy. I would argue, of course, the first one is the best of the three, and that's often the case with a lot of trilogies. This is my opinion. But hey, parts 2 and 3, they're pretty good. And they're a go-to that me and my family will continue to revisit. So, yeah, oftentimes sequels kind of suck. And that's not the case with Back to the Future.
Well, I think you have to understand, and I get into this in the book a little bit. Obviously, when they made Back to the Future, nobody had any idea that it was going to be Back to the Future, that it was going to be this behemoth hit. And they certainly didn't consider the fact that there was going to be a sequel, because everybody seems to believe that the reason the movie ends the way it does, with Doc coming in and saying,
Marty, you've got to come back with me.
Where?
Back to the future. Go ahead, quick, get in the car.
No. Doc, I just got here, okay? Jennifer's here. We're gonna take the new truck for a spin.
Well, bring her along. This concerns her, too.
Wait a minute, Doc. What are you talking about? What happens to us in the future? What, do we become assholes or something?
No, Marty. Both you and Jennifer turn out fine. It's your kids, Marty. Something has got to be done about your kids.
Most people believe that that was already in Zemeckis and Gale's minds as to continue the adventure, but the thing is, that was a joke.
Yep.
Nobody expected it, and they have both said on many occasions, well, if we had known we were going to do a sequel, we wouldn't have put Jennifer in the car.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they painted themselves into a corner that they had to address.
Yeah, Bob talked about this. Yep. So just to finish this thought out about what makes Back to the Future a great film. Well, it's a prime example of a popular and critical darling, a box office juggernaut that, I read, close to $400 million worldwide gross in 1985. And adjusted for inflation, I guess it places number 71 among the highest earning films in history. You might say, who cares? But it's kind of rare where you have a box office juggernaut and a critical darling. And when I say critical darling, like, it's still highly beloved. Like Rotten Tomatoes, you go there and you see that it gets a 93% approval rating, an average critical score of 8.8 out of 10. So I pay attention to that stuff. Like, oftentimes, real big tentpole movies, action kind of oriented films like this, summer blockbusters, sometimes they're not so great. Rotten Tomatoes says otherwise. The film also earned 4 Academy Award nominations. It's often placed on several different lists. I think it ranks as the best movie from the 80s on a separate list on Rotten Tomatoes. It's number 10 on the American Film Institute's poll of the top science fiction films ever. There's a lot of different plaudits and praise for this movie on various lists, but it wasn't just this moneymaker. It was also critically well received.
Well, the thing that you have to ask yourself when you're talking that it was number 71 on the list, how many of the films that precede it on that list are still talked about on a daily basis and continue to gather new fans of generations? Not many.
Some. Yeah, you could argue the contrary on some of these on the list, but I think you're right. I think that it remains in the pop culture consciousness, and it's the movie that's fun to revisit on key anniversaries. It's one that the media pays attention to, the public pays attention to on social media and elsewhere. It's proved its mettle as far as a movie that can't be ignored, even all these decades later.
And I'd go further in saying that it's not just something that you like to revisit on anniversaries. If you're flipping through the channels, and you see it, you stop.
It's true. Yeah, you get sucked in immediately by that narrative.
Absolutely.
I can certainly plead guilty to that. So it's not quite like Shawshank or Godfather where, hey, if I'm flipping around, okay, I am not going anywhere for 2 hours, but I may stick around for a while. That's actually happened to me where I'm flipping around and on cable, Back to the Future Part 1 is on, and I'm a captive audience again.
When I was writing the book, the original book, there was usually a Back to the Future movie on in the background, and it just kept refreshing more memories. I never tired of. I still watch it today. In fact, I saw it just a couple of days ago, and I'm always finding, even today, 40 years later, I'm finding new things that I didn't see.
I'll bet. Yeah. I mean, that's true for me too. Like, rewatches usually yield some Easter eggs that I didn't pay attention to before. So let's talk a bit about to what extent this film may have inspired other filmmakers or influenced pop culture. In the wake of Back to the Future, what are some films that maybe owe a tip of the cap to it, or maybe were inspired in some way, influenced, or just riffing on the theme in general?
I believe that every time travel movie after Back to the Future has in some way referenced it, parodied it, quoted it, or have a tip of the cap.
Can you give an example? Is there something that comes top of mind?
The most successful movie would be Avengers Endgame. The Avengers have to go back in time to correct something that will ultimately undo the damage that has been done in the previous movie.
It is a time travel movie, yes.
I believe it's Paul Rudd who specifically, or as Ant-Man, who specifically mentions Back to the Future.
All right, good example. Are there others that spring to mind?
Oh, sure. There's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yes, that would not exist without this film. Nor would Rick and Morty.
Absolutely. And then there are fun little things like Seth MacFarlane's film A Million Ways to Die in the West.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
It's based in the 1880s, and Seth MacFarlane is walking down the street of a Western town and late at night, and he sees some strange lights coming from a barn. And he goes over and peers in the door, and there's Doc Brown working on a DeLorean.
That's right.
Who hurriedly covers it up. And when Seth MacFarlane asks what he's doing, he says, well, I'm working on a weather experiment.
Yeah.
You have Hot Tub Time Machine,
Mm-hmm.
Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull,
Right.
where the opening, where Indy hides in a refrigerator to escape the effects of a nuclear blast, may have had its origin in the original ending of Back to the Future.
You bring up some great ones. A lot of humorous offspring of Back to the Future. For example, as you said, Hot Tub Time Machine, TV shows like Quantum Leap, Stranger Things on Netflix. But also immediately after this film, you get a time travel movie like Peggy Sue Got Married. And then there's Flight of the Navigator, also from 1986. Time Cop, Sliding Doors, The Butterfly Effect, Project Almanac. Several different works that I think are pulling on the same vein as something like Back to the Future. And then for that matter, it's fun, is it not, Michael, to kind of think about earlier inspirations, films or works that might have inspired Bob and Bob and their collaborators. Things, of course, like H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, the original story as well as the film adaptation, Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, Ray Bradbury's The Sound of Thunder. So there's a lot of works of literature before Back to the Future that the creators may have read and been inspired by. Twilight Zone episodes. Bob and I were talking about some of these, like Back There, No Time Like the Past, several of these episodes. The films Somewhere in Time, Time Bandits, The Atomic Cafe, The Terminator, of course, a year before this film. So it's fun to trace that lineage, if you will. And the Easter egg nods within Back to the Future, if you're paying close attention, they're paying homage to or throwing a little tip of the cap to things like, Safety Last, the old classic silent film, right? The Wizard of Oz, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, Doctor Strangelove, Star Wars, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, for that matter. That's part of the fun of a revisit or rewatch, is seeing where, I remember that similar shot or scene or something like that in a previous movie. Can you name any others that you can recall?
Not offhand. I mean, your list is pretty extensive. The Flash, a couple of years ago, had its own tribute where one of the Flashes has tattoos of Marty McFly, but it's Eric Stoltz.
That's clever. Nice little nods to the fans who pay attention to that stuff. Great bits of trivia, too.
Absolutely.
You think about, too, not just movies and works of literature and TV shows, things like that, but the pervasive nature of the pop culture influence of this movie and the franchise. It had a theme park simulator ride after its release. It had numerous video games. There was a cartoon television show, a live musical, which I still haven't seen, but which is still going, a renewed interest in skateboarding, for that matter. And there was even an official Back to the Future Day, which was October 21st, 2015, which I forgot about this, but yeah, it was celebrated by millions on social media as well as by the Obama White House. So that speaks to, hey, your movie has moved a lot of people. That's pretty cool.
Back to the Future Day, it goes on every year at this point, where the fans get together and celebrate. Every year since Back to the Future Day, or even sometimes before, a bunch of the fans would go to the Puente Hills Mall, which was the location where the Twin Pines, later to be known as the Lone Pine Mall, was used as the filming site. And they would be there at 1:20 a.m., which is when everything starts, essentially, in the film.
How fun. Yeah, so they keep doing this every year, which I wasn't aware of. I thought that was just a one-time deal, but I'm not part of that subculture, so you're more in tune with it, and it's fun to hear that, yeah, they're keeping the tradition alive. They're doing this anniversary thing every year.
Very much so. And it's celebrated also. You talked about the stage musical, which I also wrote a book about called Creating Back to the Future, the musical. And it's an amazing show, number one. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written a book about it.
I'll bet.
And they have special guests who show up on Back to the Future Day. First year, I believe it was Huey Lewis, who appeared on stage in London. They've had Don Full played Goldie Wilson. They've had Harry Waters, who played Marvin Berry, who one year did a duet of Earth Angel with the actor who was playing him on stage.
That's great.
The animated series, unfortunately, only lasted 2 seasons, but it was enough to continue the wonderful world. And I was honored, actually, along with my brother, to write 2 episodes.
That's awesome.
It was also terrifying for me to be putting words in the mouths of these classic characters and hoping that I was getting close, at least. And happily, I had Bob Gale sort of looking over my shoulder, so it represents.
So you've had your fingerprints over quite a few different iterations of Back to the Future, especially the books, too, which we've been talking about. Just to kind of finish the thought here on innovations, influences, impact, things of that nature, many critics and scholars will credit Back to the Future with solidifying more modern tropes and rules regarding time travel in movies. Many previous time travel films, you were kind of talking about this, built around the idea that the past couldn't be changed, but this work aimed to explore what might happen if it could be changed and how those alterations would reshape the future. So here I'm going to cite, this is critic Richard Scheib, who said that before Back to the Future, the time machine had existed as little more than another planet for astronauts, an exotic locale, usually a post-Holocaust setting, for two-fisted adventurers, and time travel scenarios had not developed much sophistication beyond there and back adventures or of culture class stories about visitors from one era arriving in another. After Back to the Future and The Terminator, time travel lost its linearity. Time would become fluid with the past, the present, and future, a malleable whole that could be endlessly rearranged and fought for the better. So yeah, it sounds like it was a game changer, especially in terms of time travel narratives.
Completely agree.
Back to the Future examines several key themes. So yeah, I want to ask you which ones stand out. Now, you had already mentioned, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything, which is kind of the central modus operandi here. This is likely the most remembered quote from the film. It's spoken by Marty, George, Doc Brown, and it serves as a motivational message about personal agency, right? Personal agency for them and the audience. It reminds us that believing in yourself, staying focused and determined, and not giving up can yield unexpectedly positive results. And it rejects Mr. Strickland's caustic assessment that
no McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley.
Definitely that is top of the heap for me, and it sounds like you too, as far as a major message.
And that's why it still resonates to this day, because it touches on so many different emotions and ideas. Doc never giving up on his dream, and Marty teaching his father how to stand up for himself, how to be a man.
All right, there she is, George. And just go in there and invite her.
Okay, but I don't know what to say.
Oh, just say anything, George. Say, well, whatever's natural. Well, the first thing that comes into your mind.
Nothing's coming to my mind.
Jesus, George, it was a wonder I was even born.
What? What?
Nothing. Look, tell her destiny brought you together. Tell her that she is the most beautiful girl you've ever seen in the world. Girls like that stuff. What are you doing, George?
I'm writing this down. This is good stuff.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
let's go.
He learns from that himself. The time frame changes, or the events sort of shift because of the action, and it results in this case, more improved characters. We're not too sure about Biff, but we're going to give him a pass for the time being until we start part 2.
Yeah, that's a good takeaway, by all means. I think number 2, if you were to ask me, okay, what is this film trying to tell us or have us think about? I think it's free will versus fate, because it's asking, are our lives predetermined by destiny and powers outside of our control, or can we actively change our futures and shape the direction of our lives? This is, of course, something that the Terminator series will continually address as well. And these are the questions with answers that clearly point to the latter, free will, and the power of self-determination over kismet.
Absolutely, because as you brought up at the beginning, where Mr. Strickland is nose to nose with Marty, and he makes the proclamation that no McFly in history is ever going to amount to anything. And, challenge put down and accepted by Marty. And his resolution, it wavers, as it does with all of us from time to time. I mean, he's a little reluctant after the band audition, where he's told that he's too darn loud by Mr. Lewis, but he's got a very healthy relationship with somebody who cares about him and keeps him positive and hopeful, as well as Doc Brown, who also gives him that advice. And deep down, I think even if he didn't have them or we saw them that much, I think Marty would have proved it in his own way.
Yeah, I think he demonstrates that in the character right from the start. Even though there's challenges, it is necessary. There's a conflict for every major protagonist. But yeah, that agency, that free will, is really important when we come back to that time and again throughout the narrative. But also, Back to the Future is certainly a story about the generation gap because it explores the differences and similarities, for that matter, between kids and their parents. And it asks the age-old question, what were mom and dad like at my age? Ultimately, the film, I think it espouses a positive message that it's possible for multiple generations within families to harmonize as well as understand and appreciate one another. So yeah, what's going on here as far as the family dynamic?
Well, I think this is something that Bob Gale lived in terms of, conceiving the main idea of the film. It brought up the question, how would I have acted if I'd known my father back in his high school days?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, if from everything I know, Bob had a wonderful relationship with his father, and I don't have any reason to believe that they had issues when Bob was Marty's age. But that's part of the fun of films, is taking something and sort of asking, well, what if? What if is the motivation behind a lot of popular movies. And in trying to figure out, because the Bobs wanted to do a time travel movie, and they couldn't figure out how to do it until Bob Gale saw his father's yearbook. It's an intriguing premise, and it doesn't have to be one that's in all of our minds. I never once thought, would I have been friends with my father in high school?
I agree. I don't know if I would have asked myself that question, but it was more like, what was dad like, or could I have related to him or something,
Yeah, but some people never think about it that way because they think about their parents as they're growing up and get to know them better as adults.
Mm-hmm.
You're never an equal to your parent in any sense of the word, because there's always that age gap between the two of you.
Right. Plus, mom and dad, I mean, depending on how you're raised and their parenting style, sometimes they're more authoritarian figures, or they're the ones who kind of set the rules and the boundaries, right? And you don't think of them as, hey, there was a time where they were under rules and boundaries.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. No, it's such a cool dynamic going on here as far as, the family relationships and how Marty can look at how his parents were raised. It's a fascinating premise. Like I said, it immediately sucks you in.
Once they put that into celluloid, then a lot of people did start to think about it. It gave a lot of people things to think about that they never had before they saw the movie. And then they were entertained by a very provocative question and a few provocative scenes that hopefully they would never have to do. But it's a thinking person's movie in addition to being a popcorn movie.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think for all the reasons we've already talked about, and maybe some others to come. But yeah, it's more than just, surface level entertainment, disposable, fun stuff to go see on a weekend in the summer of 1985. It has certainly proved its staying power much more beyond that. A couple other themes to chew on. I mean, obviously one is time is fleeting, right? Because we are continually shown timepieces throughout the movie. Clocks, wristwatches, digital timing devices. They all remind us how the characters risk running out of time and are perpetually concerned with temporal matters. Everything from being late for school to beating the clock before being erased from existence. So different levels of intensity there with the time running out. But the film intimates that even if we could live in the time of our choosing, Michael, we can never truly stop time. It's always ticking away. And we're reminded about that with all of the different timepieces and clock ticks that we hear.
The ticking clock has always been a mainstay in film.
Yeah, especially action movies, right?
Yeah, not necessarily just film, TV, literature. The ticking clock is a very popular and very well appreciated trope, because if it wasn't, all these films would have fallen flat on their face.
It's true. But just to finish the thought on themes, I think one last major one is a fish out of water. This is a fish out of water tale. In an interview, the director suggested Marty is akin to an extraterrestrial alien in this science fiction tale. He's the alien.
Sorry about your barn.
It's already mutated into human form. Shoot it!
son of a bitch!
He's stranded in an unknown world and shares his knowledge and skills with the surrounding natives, much like the main characters in E.T., Starman, Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. This is a common trope or setup.
It also goes back to a film like Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
40 years later, is this film showing any wrinkles or problematic points? It's been 4 decades. Obviously, culture, society has changed dramatically. Maybe not as technologically dramatically as we were kind of counting down before, but as lighthearted and family-friendly as Back to the Future would appear, it delves into some problematic territory for some viewers, courtesy of the incestuous subplot involving young Lorraine and her son being sexually attracted to one another. This Oedipus complex side story, it was the major reason why, for example, Disney rejected the screenplay. It wasn't made at that studio. So, some problematic aspects of the film. How should we address that today? We get it. It's 40 years. Like, we don't necessarily have to apologize for a movie made 4 decades ago. Things have changed. We get it. But yeah, how do you navigate a movie like Back to the Future today with scenes like that? There's the sexual assault in the car where Biff molests Lorraine. That's kind of disturbing. It touches on some social problems like racism, alcoholism, bullying. What would you say here, Michael?
Well, first I would say that it's a product of its time. We have grown as a society to accept certain things that we once didn't, or to reject certain things that were once maybe not as important as they've become. The reason that Disney turned down the film originally was because it was about a mother who, to quote Marty McFly, has the hots for her son.
That's right.
But it wasn't graphic in any way. It wasn't exploited in ways that it might be. It was innocent in its own way because of the time.
Right.
And if it was that controversial and people were that concerned about it, all the people who saw it in 1985 and grew up and got married wouldn't have introduced it to their children, who then grew up, had kids of their own, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's rather innocuous, a lot of this stuff. I'm not saying it's above criticism. I mean, it's fair game all these decades later to kind of point out some things that maybe haven't aged the greatest. I would say that the most troubling scene in 2025 to watch is the assault in the car. That's troublesome to me. If they'd never made the movie or if it was remade, they'd probably handle that differently. But again, it's 1985 and it's a different time.
Well, I mean, think about it this way, Eric. Biff ultimately gets his comeuppance in the most inspirational way, because not only does he get his comeuppance, it's served to him by a young man who has suddenly discovered he is a man.
There's other people, though, who will have a problem with the fact that Lorraine doesn't really have much agency herself. And again, I'm not trying to nitpick, Michael, and I don't necessarily agree with some of these criticisms. Some of it is fair game, but it doesn't doom the movie for me 4 decades onward. 1985 was a different time.
Absolutely.
And so was 1955, for that matter.
Right. Actually, if you go to see Back to the Future, the musical, Biff and Lorraine in that car are not as disturbing.
How do they handle it? What's going on?
Well, it's less violent. Also, if you think in terms of history, and this is going to be maybe a strange kind of comparison, go back to all of those classic Max Fleischer Popeye cartoons, where Bluto, essentially, he's beating the crap out of Popeye for most of the cartoon, and he's also very untoward towards Olive.
Right. And she has zero agency there, right?
He has no agency. And it's like, give me a kiss, come on. And those cartoons continue to go on, and nobody has dissected them in that way until I just did. And I think it's kind of the same for Back to the Future, because it's not seen through a real life lens. People still have the ability to separate fiction from real life.
Yeah, and that's the key there, the differentiation there. We talked about themes. There are some life lessons you can interpret, but as far as holding this 40-year-old film to a standard in 2025, no.
As many people have espoused, the words, it's a movie, are very strong.
Yeah.
Back to the Future has proven itself to be above that. And yes, you're always going to get people who want to argue about it, who have their theories. There are more people who go on social media and talk about Back to the Future and claim they know what was in the heads of Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale when they made these movies, and they couldn't be more further from the truth.
Armchair quarterbacks, yep.
They're taking their own value and ascribing them to people that they don't know and placing importance on things that have absolutely nothing to do with how it was created and what it really represents.
No, it's true. But I definitely wanted to touch with you briefly. I'm sure you've heard some of these theories or ways to interpret the movie. Being a product of the Reagan era, smack dab in the middle of the 80s, whatever you thought about Reagan or his administration, I think there's a little bit of there, reflecting Reagan-era ideals, celebrating the pursuit of the American dream, romanticizing a safer, simpler path through a nostalgic lens, embracing a vision of the future where material success, like, for example, a new Toyota 4x4 or richer parents, like, that's the reward for personal ambition and hard work. Doc Brown himself, he's been interpreted as, maybe this symbolic figure representing Reagan, a forward-looking advocate of technological progress who confronts threats like Libyan terrorists and helps uplift a struggling family. And then there's others who theorize that Back to the Future emphasizes the authority and redemptive power of paternal figures like George McFly and Doc Brown. Reagan's capitalistic ethos is exemplified in the rampant embedded marketing found throughout the film, those people would argue, as evidenced by the recurrent mentions and consumption of products by Pepsi and Toyota and Miller. Yeah, what do you think? Is that a fair reading?
I think a lot of people are looking for a lot of things that aren't necessarily there. Pepsi, Miller Beer, Toyota, they're product placement.
Oh, yeah.
They fit in the story, but I don't think that a statement is being made in a lot of these cases. I think a lot of people are looking for a lot of things that just aren't there. In terms of Reaganomics and all of that, I choose not to really go that far because that's not what it's intended for. That's the movie isn't a rah-rah Reagan era vehicle. It has its own values, and Ronald Reagan loved it. And when he found himself mentioned in the film during a screening of the White House, he had the projectionist stop and rewind it to hear it again.
I did hear that story.
He felt strongly enough about the film and values that it espoused for him to want to mention in his State of the Union speech that film.
Never has there been a more exciting time to be alive, a time of rousing wonder and heroic achievement. As they said in the film Back to the Future, where we're going, we don't need roads.
It envisioned a time he wanted people to think about they could have again in a better way.
It's just interesting to kind of think back. If you lived through that era, if you know anything about history or politics or whatever, even if it was an inadvertent, subconscious echo or mirroring of the Reagan era that was unintended by the filmmakers, I don't know. Maybe if you want to look, you'll find something there.
No, if you look hard enough, you can find anything that you're looking for.
I guess so. Yeah, you'll find a picture of Jesus on the Jell-O mold that your grandma just made.
Correct.
All right, well, we're rounding third. We're heading home here. Our show is called Cineversary because we celebrate a milestone anniversary or birthday of a movie classic. So yes, Michael, it is Back to the Future's 40th birthday. And birthdays are about giving presents, only it's the fans who continue to receive the gifts. So what is this film's greatest gift to viewers?
This whole movie is a gift in its entirety, in its popularity, in its charm, in its ability to entertain. If you just took it at face value as an entertainment vehicle, that alone is a gift. But to have the meaning and the sincerity and the thoughtfulness that goes into that film, each facet of the film together made it what it was. The writing, the direction, the cast. Mm-hmm. Eric Stoltz is a tremendous actor, but if he continued to play Marty McFly and they made that film totally with Eric Stoltz, you and I wouldn't be talking right now.
No, I don't think so. No, wouldn't have the cultural relevance, the pop culture cachet that it does. Michael J. Fox was the game changer here. Like, I just can't picture it. Yes, I know that there's footage that exists of Eric Stoltz, so yes, you can picture somebody else, but not with great results.
There is, but every person who was cast in that film is perfect for what they did. I mean, Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, Tom Wilson, James Tolkien, everybody in that film together make up this event that we are still talking about to this day, and we will continue to talk about.
Hear, hear. Can't disagree with anything you said there. I mean, for my part, if you ask me, I think the best package to unwrap is the stellar script. As I said, the plot of which boasts marvelous intricacy, memorable characters, impressive story threads that are introduced early and which pay dividends down the line, all of which help this narrative stand as one of the greatest ever written for the screen. I will contend that, absolutely. Here are some efficient and effective examples of these setups and payoffs, both large and small. So, for setup, in 1985, a woman hands Marty a flyer about the clock tower being struck by lightning at exactly 10:04 p.m. on November 12, 1955, during a small-town fundraiser encounter. The payoff is that exact event and the flyer's details becoming the crucial key to sending Marty back to the future. Here's another setup. Doc explains early on that the DeLorean must reach 88 miles per hour to activate the flux capacitor and time travel. The payoff? Marty must repeatedly hit exactly 88 miles per hour at critical moments to escape danger and return to 1985. Another example, well, early in the film, it's revealed that George secretly writes science fiction stories. The payoff is that Marty uses this to pose as an alien to scare George into asking Lorraine to the dance, and in 1985, George has become a published author. And there's this setup. Marty carries a photo of himself and his siblings from 1985, and then the payoff, Marty inadvertently interferes with his parents' meeting in 1955, and his siblings start fading from the photo, visually raising the stakes about his own existence. Yet another setup, well, Marty is shown early on as a talented, frustrated guitarist trying to land an audition, remember? And the payoff is that he delivers an electrifying performance of Johnny Be Good at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, securing his parents' first kiss and unintentionally inventing rock and roll. We also have in 1955, if you recall, Marty meets young busboy Goldie Wilson at Lou's Cafe. He suggests he could be a mayor someday. Later, in 1985, Goldie Wilson is indeed the mayor of Hill Valley, as hinted at by a TV re-election ad at the film's start. Recall that the mall is named Twin Pines Mall in 1985, but after Marty runs over one of Old Man Peabody's two prized pine trees in 1955, the mall is renamed Lone Pine Mall in the altered 1985 timeline. Little Easter egg there. Yeah, one great example after another of how Back to the Future is this delayed gratification machine that perfectly lines up innumerable pins and then, much later bowls one perfect strike after another, scoring a perfect game for one of the all-time great popcorn movies. Were there any current or forthcoming projects, events, appearances, or otherwise that our listeners should know about?
Well, if you follow the Back to the Future world, you may see me pop up here and there. I go to conventions and I announce some stuff on Facebook. People can look me up there, and there's talk of some upcoming possible revisions of a book or two. And I've been given this gift of being with Back to the Future since 1989, and I'm not ready to stop.
Don't blame you. That's a nice gift. Well, Michael, this was a blast revisiting with you one of the best movies from the 1980s, a classic that holds up 4 decades later. Thanks ever so much for powering up that old DeLorean and taking a scenic drive around Hill Valley with me.
Thank you, and take care, Eric.
Fun stuff there, unpacking all the elements that help make Back to the Future a worthy celebrant 40 years later. My thanks again to Bob and Michael for their time and insights. Are you ready for your close-up? Because Norma Desmond sure is. She'll be here waiting for you when you return to our show in August to help us honor the Diamond Jubilee of what could be Billy Wilder's magnum opus, Sunset Boulevard, originally released 75 years ago in 1950. Until that time, I remain your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and yes, indeed, cherish those classic movies. They're not getting older, McFly. They're getting better. As always, thanks, folks, for giving us a listen.